just to set the stage for our conversation, we've been looking at a couple of reports from the Kenya Bankers Association, which of course tracks in terms of a price index as well as consult. And the indication is that we've been seeing a slowdown in the rate of increase in terms of prices for property as well as rental yields. Yeah. And from where you sit, if we could just get a sense of where do you feel this market stands as we speak, when we look at some of those key trends, because there's been so much concern around this area. Catherine, if I could start with you.
Okay. Thank you, Julian. It is true, there's been a bit of slowdown in that area. But we, from our perspective, we associate this with the fact that the economy has not been as vibrant as it has been before. Also around credit, availability of credit. So you get to see some of the clients that we had before, for instance, Premier Realty Limited, are not able to service or pay up for properties that they have or that they acquire from us. So this really brings a slowdown in terms of the appetite for property in the market, in terms of the property is there, but are people ready and willing and able to actually purchase the same? So I'd associate it a lot with credit, availability of credit, both for suppliers and both from a supply and demand perspective, as well as I think the trends in the economy, and I think all of us feel it.
Yes. And it looks like the macroeconomic environment is the key factor playing out when it comes to the trend in the real estate market. What's your view of the developments you're seeing right now?
There's a lot of speculative development, and my view is that a lot of developers and investors are not undertaking a lot of property research before they undertake these developments. The market, as Catherine has said, has slowed down when you look at unpaid bills by government, both national and county, means that there is not enough money circulating in the economy, and that is hurting a lot of the population in Kenya. Therefore, if you look at even the trends, KRA has already indicated there's a drop in revenue from pay as you earn because there are retrenchments that are taking place in the employment sector. So when you try and track the employment sector and those who are in formal employment, you see there is a downward trend. And that is definitely affecting the uptake of residential properties. So we are going to see a market correction in the next few years. It's already started.
Yes.
Yes.
And Washo, Gikonya talks about there isn't ample research which is conducted by developers when they're looking at putting up property in this market. You sit on the side which I believe conducts this sort of research every so often. Do you share the same sentiments as what he's putting across?
Yes, definitely. According to our research, we are seeing a lot of declining demand, and we're seeing a lot of oversupply in some sectors and less supply in some sectors. For instance, in residential, everyone knows there's this huge housing deficit, which is because developers are usually gravitate towards the high end and the top markets, but in the low end market there's no enough supply where there's a very huge demand. In the commercial sector, however, we're seeing a lot of oversupply against the effective demand that is there, and so this has been brought about by a lot of speculation. There's a time there used to be a lot of international firms setting up shop in Kenya, and then there was growth in SMEs, but right now we're seeing the economic environment is not very business friendly, as they've mentioned, and so SMEs are suffering as a result. They cannot be able to take up this office space, and so in the commercial sector we're seeing a lot of oversupply but no demand, but in residential we're seeing a lot of demand but not enough supply.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Catherine, if I could come back to you, Gikonya mentioned something which I think out of public interest I have to ask. He spoke about a market correction. And the talk out here is that there has been a bubble building up within the real estate market. Is this a correct assessment? Yeah. And when we talk about, for example, a correction being imminent in the next 2 or 3 years, as he has said, do you feel that the property market is in a position which I would say is precarious?
I would say that just like Mr. Gikonya says, it's a correction. It's not a bubble burst as such. So I think the trend in the market has been that some of the properties have been overpriced. Both commercial, residential, land has been overpriced. But with time now, we are seeing it being to a ceiling where it is time for it to correct itself, and so that we can have the right valuation, the right pricing in the market. So as much as the prices are not skyrocketing or growing as fast as before anticipated, I think the market actually has a way of correcting itself. Like Mr. Gikonyo says, it's time for it to slow down and say this is the correct valuation or pricing in a certain area or in a certain place.
Yeah. And Bwana Gikonyo, give us a scenario analysis in terms of this correction that you've mentioned, because I remember last week one particular developer put out a whole 58 pages of properties on auction. And one of the interesting things about this is that I looked at one particular property whereby the guiding price was 18 million, but if you look at the expected rent per month is about 60 million shillings. Now, if you work out that rental yield expectation, clearly there was a challenge in terms of this person being able to service their mortgage obligations. So when you talk about a correction and the valuations now coming back to where they should be, what do you foresee as the situation?
First of all, you see the property auctions are not taking place because of the bubble or the price correction. What the property auctions, and we are seeing a lot of property auctions taking place, is because the economy has slowed down. And what has happened is that most of the people who have borrowed, who are either in employment or are doing business, are just going through very tough times. And so they've not been able to meet their mortgage obligations, and that's why there has been auctions. What you will notice is that even the banks that are then putting these properties on auction are also struggling to find buyers for these properties, which therefore then means that maybe they were overpriced, or there is not enough people, or there's not enough demand to buy these properties. In regard to rental yields are for residential properties in Kenya are low. So what you will find is that the rental yields will be between 4 to 6%. But a lot of people who buy properties, if they were to do their analysis on property on rental yields, it doesn't make economic sense. Mm-hmm. In a lot of instances, also, the amount you get in rental will not match what your mortgage repayments are, because mortgage interests are high. So that's not just the way to look at it. But what happens is that people who invest in residential or most properties also are banking on capital appreciation. So there is a huge capital appreciation, and this has been consistent in a lot of these properties. That even when a developer puts a property off plan, by the time he has finished developing the property will have appreciated by maybe 10 to 20%. So therefore, that means that there is just Kenyans have put a lot of emphasis on owning property, which is a good thing. But sometimes, does it make economic sense? Does it produce good yields? Not necessarily, but the capital appreciation is there. Okay. And I can't say that there is a bubble yet, because there is growing demand. The population is increasing. We have a growing middle class, although it's slowed down a bit. And we have a young population. So definitely there will still be demand.
Catherine, you look like you had a point to add on to that before I move to Washroom.
Yeah, I just wanted to perhaps just give a scenario based on where I come from. And I'll maybe take an example of an area like Raqqa. So I know 4 or 5 years ago, many people went there, bought land, and put up residential apartments. And at that point in time, rent was between 30 and 35,000. However, we've seen many other people do the same. That place has become a concrete jungle. So what has happened? The rents have had to come down. So these people initially perhaps had taken mortgages and loans to actually service their facilities, but now they've had to reduce the rent. I know they're going between 22 to 27,000. And this has reduced the income that they had anticipated, therefore not being able to service their loans as they had expected. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the kind of scenario we're talking about when we talk about what's happening in the rental space.
I see. And Washo, Gikonya mentioned that there is growing demand, but we know for a fact that there is the aspect of demand and then there is effective demand, the willingness and the ability to be able to meet the financial requirements, whether it is you're renting or you're purchasing. When you look at the research that you've done focusing on this area, whether it is commercial or rental or both in that case, what's your sense around the demand-supply dynamics? Because the report we get right now is that we walk around and you're seeing to let all over, especially on the commercial side. If you take a walk down Upper Hill, you will notice quite a number of buildings which occupancy rates are 60% at most.
There's a bit of imbalance in terms of the supply-demand dynamics. For instance, in the residential sector, as I said, we're seeing a lot of less supply against the effective demand. So the effective demand is actually in the low-end markets for residential, where actually people don't have decent housing, and so they need that. While in the top markets, we've seen the market being driven by a lot of speculative demand. This is where someone just banks on, they want to trade on that house maybe 2 years, 3 years down the line after they bought it. So there's been a lot of speculative demand driving supply in that sector, and that is why we're seeing a lot of supply right now and not many people actually buying, because the speculative demand is no longer there as much. And on the commercial side, we're seeing markets like Upper Hill and markets like Westlands, where there's been a lot of supply, and so now that demand is kind of scaling back, buildings are largely empty. Like there's minimal occupancy rates in those areas, and that is because there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of buildings for buyers and tenants to choose from. However, this is not the situation in all markets because there are markets that are actually underserved. If you look at the commercial sector, markets like say Karen, which is just growing, the commercial scene is actually just budding. Markets like Gikiri, where it's a potential commercial hub, but there isn't as much commercial supply. And so the oversupply is actually in markets where there's a lot of supply and minimal demand. And on the issue of auctioning, actually, I would say it's about, yes, people are not being able to service mortgages, and this is because people are actually we're seeing people losing jobs left, right, and center, and so they're not able to service their mortgages as much. But auctioning, I would say, is also a way of selling properties that have been in the market for too long. And so auctioning is an easier way for sellers to get rid of these properties at market rates. But yes, those properties are being defaulted on by buyers, so they're being auctioned off. Yeah, that's pretty much what's happening.
Maybe just add on to what Washu says. Well, auctions are happening. However, we've seen many more auctioneers coming into the field, new players into the market, because they believe that there's an opportunity. However, like you said, you saw a page of I don't know how many properties up for auction, but these auctions all don't fall through because the buyers are not there. They don't have the ability to be able to pay up for these properties upfront. Auctioneer will ask for X amount of money. Most people will want to go back and get financing or something like that. So is there a ready market even for the auction? I'm not too sure about that either.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And Mr. Gikonya, let me get your views around this. One of the oft-cited issues is that the rate cap in the commercial banking sector has been a huge challenge around this. When you read the CBK reports, for example, 2 sectors are flagged to be high risk by most banks. One is agriculture now, the other is in the housing market, real estate largely. How significant a challenge has this been from where you sit?
Honestly speaking, I don't think that, well, the rate cap has been significant in that banks are wary or do not want to take the risk of lending to real estate. But it also, when you look at it, that the banks are lending money at 14%, but they're lending to government at 12%. So what's the easiest thing to do? The banks are just finding it easier to lend to the government. But the number of mortgages that are out there, which is estimated about 26,000 mortgages, is not a perfect indicator of the way the market is performing. There is a sector that has not been looked at, is the cooperative societies, the SACCOs. The SACCOs are estimated to have lent money into real estate more than 100,000. And these are not secured against land or housing. These are secured against the members' savings. Deposits.
Correct.
So we also need to track how much of the SACCOs has gone into housing. Secondly is that people's savings. So there are some people who then are taking typical bank loans but are investing in real estate, but they're not charging, they're not mortgaging their property. So that is a big significant input. When you look at the statistics with regard to diaspora remittances, they say that almost 80% of diaspora remittances ends up going to investment in real estate. And that is not mortgages. So that investment in real estate is huge. And it's for people who are owning the houses which they have done it as investments. So there is still a big, so I would not say that the availability of mortgages and interest rate caps is what is dampening the real estate market. Yeah.
Okay.
I just agree with Bwana Gikonyo. Diaspora remittances are there, and I think that's a lucrative market for most of us in the real estate industry. However, I also feel that the capping has also has slowed down the kind of lending that is there, especially for people who could easily get unsecured loans and buy, that parcel of land. I think for us at Premier Realty, we did quite a bit of people who would pick up an unsecured loan and buy, a chunk of land, for speculative purposes or, for investment or trying to construct a home for themselves, because they're thinking by the time I go to a bank, get a construction loan or a loan just to buy land, the bank will have too many bureaucracies in between there. So there was that. We had quite a number of people, especially the employed, who could easily, go to banks, get unsecured loans and come in and purchase. But I think the last 2-3 years, we've seen a bit of a lull in that, in terms of people are not able to access this finance as easily as they used to before. So I feel that the capping would be a discussion, and I think it's ongoing, would be a discussion that, the authorities that be should have, so that, they can make these funds more accessible to us.
I see.
Yeah.
And Washo, let me just get your quick thoughts. How is this state of the market now recasting the developer side? Often, we look at it from the demand side in terms of I want to buy a home or I want to rent, and this is how the scenario looks like. But developers, are they having a scripted narrative in terms of what they're now thinking about being into the market, or how exactly is this impacting their thoughts about this?
On the developer side, actually, I can say that the key issue is actually finance. And while there's a lot of opportunities in, say, diaspora remittances, we're seeing the interest rate cap legislation, it has actually affected developer financing, because you're seeing lending institutions, they're actually preparing to lend to, safer individual, like say going for government officials and all that, instead of lending to the private sector. And this has actually affected developer financing a lot, and that is why you're seeing a lot of approvals have actually been declining, because even though you get an approval, there's no money to build your project or that. It's not easy to get access to financing right now. And actually CBK showed that between 2016 and 2017, 2018 to 2019, the financing for credit for private sector has been around 4% compared to double digit before the bank amendment law. It was about 14 to 18%. That's the average buyer. And so developer financing has been affected in that sense. And that is why we are lobbying for government to put in policies that can allow for developers to access financing from, say, the capital markets, because capital markets in Kenya or even developing nations like Kenya are quite undeveloped if you compare to developed markets. For instance, in developed markets, you can you find developers, they get their financing from capital markets. About 60% of their funding comes from capital markets. However, in Kenya, it's about 5% from capital markets, and that is the reason why a lot of developers are not being able to put out as much supply as they used to before.
But Washa, to be fair, I mean, we appreciate the state of our capital markets. And when you talk about, for example, raising capital,
Yeah.
I'd imagine you have a bond in mind, for instance, that they will be able to issue that.
Yeah.
But given the state of our capital markets, and last week we saw a developer is raising 5 billion shillings,
Yeah.
but they had to get a guarantee for it, you
Yeah.
know, just to
Yeah.
ensure that it flies with the market. We do appreciate that this will remain a constraint for a while. I don't know what outlook you have in terms of, because we have the rate cap on this side, we have a corporate bond market which is in a significant lull, I could say.
Yeah.
How do you see this evolving going forward? Because I don't think the rate cap is going anytime soon, based on what Parliament has been saying.
Yeah, and that's the thing. If we are actually going to address this supply issue, then we have to actually tap into the capital markets. I don't see any other way around, because if the interest rate cap is not going anywhere, then we have to find alternative solutions. And that is why now we are starting to see developers now issuing bonds. And that was a partnership between a Kenyan firm and an international firm. And I think it had a lot of backing from foreign governments. So we need to see our own government backing up such initiatives, and also allowing, say, investment firms to come into this funding scenario where developers can be able to get financing from investment firms at friendly rates.
Mr. Gikonen, do you share the same views?
Well, I think that the problems that are facing real estate investment and developers is macroeconomic. When you look at the economy, we just need an injection or transformation of the way the economy is operating. The focus of government is to provide an enabling environment. And the enabling environment is around a number of things. Firstly is infrastructure. The cost of infrastructure is very high in terms of use. If you're going to get a developer and he goes and tries and opens up areas, and you can't get water, you can't get power, and you can't get roads, sewer, and all proper waste management. Therefore, this means that the developer has to meet those costs. That increases the costs of development. Secondly is cost of construction. I mean, the amount of taxes against cement, taxes against steel and all that. That's what we need to address. What are the bottlenecks to make these construction materials cheaper?
Yeah.
Thirdly, my pet is the cost of doing business. Cost of doing business and the ease of doing business. The myriad approvals that somebody is required to do. And even when you read the Architectural Association of Kenya have produce a report every 6 months, the state of the built environment. And they talk about the bottlenecks that are there, including approvals, permitting, transactions, land transactions. I mean, 50 years into Kenya's independence, we still cannot be able to do electronic transactions. When you tell anyone that he's going to go and do a transaction at the land office or through the county government, it's a nightmare. So unless we reduce those, we make the business to be easier and less time, because time is money if you spend so much time. So you find that a lot of developers that's where their bottlenecks are.
Okay. Yeah. And Catherine, you've spoken about the myriad of approvals that one needs and the red tape that you face whenever you're dealing with construction, and that bakes into the aggregate cost. And many times you raise this issue with government officials and they'll tell you, hey, look, if we get rid of some of these requirements, that's how we end up with collapsed buildings every so often. Granted, there might be someone who takes a kickback and sleeps on their job and poor construction is put up. But where do you feel the balance is between these approvals and the fact that it actually bakes into the cost?
I would say that approvals are necessary. We need checks and balances. However, there are too many. Yeah. There are too many, and there are too many institutions that are trying to do the same thing. So if there would be a way to consolidate this and get approvals simplified. For instance, I mean, you'd find, there's anyway, let me not name the institutions, but there are too many institutions all pegged on trying to give approvals for development. So if we could merge them and marry them into a simple platform or a simple place where it's a one-stop place, you can get all this, you can get your NEMA approvals, you can get all those approvals that you need, as opposed to going to one office, government office. 3 days later, you need to go to another, that kind of process, shortening it, making it easier, and like Bwana says, simplifying the process, that would work. I think processes, the checks and balances need to be there. Yeah. However, there needs to be a balance. And I think back to the narrative everybody talks about is how do we get, corruption off that process to make it a more easy and integral process.
Okay.
Yeah.
And before we get into the discussion about the mortgage lending itself, there's a question which has been flying around quite a bit, and I'd like to get your thoughts on it. We are having this demonetization exercise whereby we're withdrawing the old generation 1,000 shillings note and getting in the new generation. And the widespread argument has been that a lot of the illicit flows are now being pumped into the property market, whether you're buying or constructing hurriedly, just to ensure that you, by the time October 1st is getting here, at least you have spent the stack of cash that you had in your house. As people in the development field, is this a scenario you would say you're seeing play out, or what's the case?
I wouldn't say it's a scenario, because reports and data is showing that uptake has been declining, it hasn't been increasing. So if that was the case, then we would be seeing a lot of houses off the market. Like these auctions, the houses would be being sold out overnight, but that's not the case.
Okay.
Yeah.
You call it?
You see all these land transactions, you're not going to do land transactions with cash.
In cash.
You'd have to do a transfer. So I don't think that demonetization is really being played out in the buying of real estate, because you would still have to do the transaction. However, my personal theory is that when you look at a lot of the corruption cases and what has been put in corruption, people either have put their money under their mattress or have invested in real estate. And what they've done is that they've invested in real estate by either going and doing a lot of developments where they can buy the building materials by cash or something of the sort. And so what is going to happen is that I'm seeing that there is definitely going to be a bit of slowdown in the real estate because it's traceable.
Yeah.
So if you're a proceeds of crime, if you put it in a car or you put it in real estate, it is easily traceable. So that might affect the real estate market, but somehow you just drive around and see the amount of cars showrooms that are opening up everywhere. There's a new car showroom opening up. So maybe I don't know where the money is because I can't see it myself, but definitely that demonetization is not going to be seen in real estate.
Catherine?
Well, I also don't think it's in real estate because we're not feeling it as Premier Realty. However, just like Bwana says, unless they're going to buy material and put it on hold until something happens, it's not trickling down. Yeah, so it's not, like Pashu says, the expectation would be like the properties we have up for sale should be going fast and furious. Yeah. Or like the auctions that are happening, we should not be having many aborted auctions one after the other. We should be seeing those people with that kind of cash coming in and taking it. So, but it's not happening. We're not seeing it. So I'm not sure what part of the real estate, and like Bwana says, if it's a land transaction, it has to be a bank transfer. Mm-hmm. So it's easily traceable. So, but not feeling it yet, so we don't know where that money is.
I see. And just to switch gears to the question of mortgages, which is a key matter of interest for our viewers. Official data shows that the average mortgage size in Kenya is about 11 million shillings. And I did some quick back of the envelope calculations last evening. And if you're working with the present rate of 13% and you take about 10 years to pay off that, you're paying about 164,000 shillings a month. If you extended that to 20 years, then you're paying about 129,000 shillings a month. Very few Kenyan households can afford this. What do you think is the way forward as far as this is concerned? If I could start with you, Kikon.
I believe that it will be longer tenor mortgages. You've got to go mortgages that are longer, maybe 15, 20 years or 25 years. But also that then will be coupled with what is the age of the person who is borrowing.
Exactly.
So certainly I can't borrow for 25 years. So the person who will borrow for 25 years would have to be literally a 25-year-old or a 30-year-old person.
Yeah.
But I think what will happen is that if there is long-term finance being given to the mortgage institutions, and I think that's what the intention of the KMRC was, the Kenya Mortgage Finance Corporation, is that they can be able to give at lower interest rates to these financial institutions. But I just waiting to see how it will play, because the financial institutions that are funding the World Bank, the African Development Bank, and everyone who want to lend money to the KMRC are the advocates of removing the interest rate caps.
Yes.
So if they remove the interest rate caps, so how much do they intend to lend to the bank, and what do the banks then intend to lend to the purchaser?
Yeah.
And they still need to make a little profit. So even with the interest rate caps coming, the interest rates will go up, definitely. So as I said, what's going to happen is that we just have to strengthen things like the SACCOs, and underlying is a need for the economy to grow, because even when you look at mortgage and borrowing from the banks, the banks' terms and conditions are they want to see a pay slip. So you've got a pay slip. I mean, how many Kenyans are in formal employment? There are about 2.4 to 3 million Kenyans out of a working population of about 18 million people. So that means that these mortgages is just going to be for a few. I mean, I don't know what the statistics are, but they say that even from the statistics of the people who have mortgages, this estimate, I think maybe 70 to 80% of the mortgages are actually taken up by bank employees and people who have two mortgages. So the Kenyans, wananchi, how many of them have taken mortgages?
Countable.
So it's countable.
Yes.
Yes.
So, Catherine, just on the same question, what do you think is the way out? And how do we make the mortgage credit facility a Mwananchi product? Because that's really the question out there.
I'll give you an example of what is actually happening with us around selling of land. So you're finding many people are buying land, and most real estate companies who are selling land have given customers installment kind of payments so they can afford to pay. So now they're going back to their partners in the real estate to say, I want land, it's going to cost me $1 million shillings. How do I pay slowly so that I can afford it? So you find many people moving out of Nairobi and the main areas to Kitengela, Kiambu, and the outskirts. And then after they buy the land, they decide, let me build my house slowly, at my own pace, and at what I can afford. So you find I'm here living in Nairobi, renting, but I'm trying to put up my house slowly, as opposed to going to take a mortgage where the process is very bureaucratic, or the requirements requirements that most people will not afford.
Yeah.
So you find people choosing the way of, let me do my thing slowly. So you find that's how you find all these other constructions happening, especially Kitengela, Kiambu, the outskirts, like you said, happening, and people are doing their own thing slowly. So I'm not sure what the banks really need to do around working with the Mwananchi to really include them back again into the mortgage industry.
Washo?
I think the mortgage issue in Kenya has been mainly because of affordability. Like the houses, as you said, the average mortgage size is about 11 million, and that kind of mortgage repayment can only be afforded by probably about 2% of Kenyans, because according to KenBest, they say about 97% of Kenyans, they earn below 100,000, and actually 75% of that earn below 50,000. And for a person like that, they can only afford a mortgage repayment of about 2 to 3 million houses. And there isn't a lot of supply in the market that costs around that much. So there's that whole issue of affordability. And then the Kenya Mortgage Refinancing Company now is supposed to come in and increase liquidity for lenders so that they can be able now to offer mortgages for longer periods. And we believe that offering mortgages for 20 years to 30 years definitely is going to make them more affordable. And because I did back on the envelope also analysis, and it shows that if you increase mortgage tenors from 12 years to 20 years, it reduces the monthly repayments to about 15 to 20%, and that's a huge amount. So it will bring in more inclusion even to the low middle income earners who now will be able to take these mortgages. And then with the refinancing company, we also expect that there is now going to be a lot of competition because in the market right now, we see the situation is that a lot of mortgages come from a very small number of lending institutions, probably 5 or 6. So they cater to around 80% of the mortgage market. And so with KMRC now working with both banks and circles to bring in lower interest rate mortgages, there's going to be a lot of competition among the lenders. And so that whole scenario will play out to bring more affordable mortgages to everyone in the market, including the low-end income earners.
But we all seem to be in sync that there is a need for longer tenor issuances. And one of the interesting proposals which was tabled by the Ministry of Housing before the National Assembly was with regard to the Civil Servants Housing Fund Scheme, the requirement or proposal that we should extend, we should allow civil servants to be able to continue servicing their mortgage after retirement for a maximum of 5 years. I don't know what you think about this, Mr. Gikonya. Would this be a viable proposal in your view?
The question we need to ask is, how many civil servants are these?
Yeah.
When you start looking about the population of the number of civil servants, I think maybe there could be about 300,000, 400,000.
Yeah.
That's just a drop in the ocean in terms of the economy. I still come back again to the ease of doing business, the transactions. When you look at any developer who's selling property, he's got a price. If you pay cash, if you pay installment, and if you pay mortgage. If you look at the mortgage price, it is another 10% or 20% more if you're buying by mortgage. Why? It's because he knows how long it takes him to go through the process through the bank and registration of that mortgage at the lands office. I talked to a developer who tells me that you have to budget about 8 months to complete that transaction. So who is paying for the interest at that time?
Yeah.
You've sold the property, you are not able to, you've sold the property, you're not able to conclude that transaction. But you're still paying interest as a developer for that property. And that's 8%, 8 months interest. So what happens is that the transaction is too complicated, it takes too long, and we now have to reduce that. But very interestingly, this is a developer who I've discussed with, who is selling property. He sold some property in Athi River, and they were less than, they were about the 3 to 5 million. And he says that the majority of the buyers were people who bought cash or through installment. They didn't take mortgages. So the people have saved to be able to buy that house. So I think what we just need to do is to make it easier. We need to bring down the cost of construction so that these properties can be able to be bought by the majority of the population. Yeah.
When you talk about bringing down the cost of construction, we clearly appreciate that the red tape that you face is a key challenge. Is there any other element which you feel, perhaps when it comes to the cost of inputs, which can be significantly addressed in terms of just addressing this high cost of property in this market?
I believe in Kenya we are very, very cat on brick and mortar.
Yeah.
I think if we looked or explored different ways of construction using different material. For us, we want to see the stone, and it has to be a stone house and cement. But in other countries, in other developed countries, you see, the construction is totally different. The materials they use is perhaps way cheaper, as opposed to the cement and stone. So I think it would be, the onus is on us to look for other different types of materials that we can use to do our construction. And also sensitize people that this material is also okay.
Yes.
It's safe, for people to live in houses using, other kind of, if you give Kenyans prefab, for instance, they'll be a bit hesitant.
Yeah.
But also sensitizing them and letting them know that this is okay. It's good quality as well, and also getting the good quality down there.
Many Kenyans will cite sentimental and cultural attachments to that. I don't know what you think, Washo, about the cost of construction in the country and what perhaps could be done in terms of scaling it down.
Yeah, definitely in Kenya, the cost of construction is quite high, and that is a challenge for a lot of developers. And considering that we are looking towards delivering about 500,000 units by 2022, then we definitely need to do something about it, and that is definitely by employing alternative building technologies. And as it has been said, a lot of Kenyans are against that idea, and because of sentimental issues, they only know brick and mortar is the best way to go, and that's not true. So we need to do a lot in terms of sensitizing the market that it's actually okay. There are a couple of projects in the market that are built using alternative building technologies. There's manufacturers for the same in Kenya. So we need to do a lot of sensitizing and creating awareness and letting people know that these houses are just as durable as brick and mortar. And then I had something to say about mortgage. So the issue about providing long-term mortgages and considering that maybe someone is too old to continue paying, say, for 20-30 years, the government can also include, say, something about mortgage policies that would allow this house to be passed on, and the mortgage repayments also to be passed on maybe to your child or the same, so that they can continue repaying the mortgages, and that would work for the 30-year period. Like in South Africa, we see mortgages that are about 30-year periods, and that's a long time, and many people don't actually live long enough to, for that whole 30 years. So they need to come up with policies to allow these mortgage repayments to be passed on to your next of kin or your children. Yeah.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about the policy environment, and especially around this whole discussion around affordable housing and what the government is proposing in terms of putting forward. If you read the budget 2019-2020, there was an underallocation of 10.5 billion shillings. And this was an upgrade from the previous year, 6.5 billion. There was the whole distribution around social housing, things like the housing levy and how that would be sorted out. The whole idea of affordable housing provision and the number of units being targeted by 2022, how do you feel this is likely to impact the market, especially when it comes to the bottom tier of the market? Catherine?
I'm not too sure who's going to get the houses. That's where I stand, because I think we need clarity around these houses are there. The government is planning to do the three phases of houses, but around their location and the long-term funding, I'm not too sure I'm clear on that as well. Okay. So I think we need clarity around who is actually going to get these houses. They say we need to go up and apply, to get the houses depending on where you are and depending on your income. But I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done around that for Kenyans, first and foremost, to believe in the whole project and process. Also, for us to, take in the fact that, this is a project that the government is hoping to do. I think previously we've seen the government come up with some good projects, but the beneficiaries are not the intended beneficiaries. So I think that's where I stand, and that's my personal view.
Quite some skepticism there. Mr. Gikono, please.
The affordable housing program is still something that a lot of people don't understand. And I think they don't understand it because it's not been very well articulated by government in how it's going to work. Yes, there is in this last budget, there was 5 billion allocated to the National Housing Fund, of which you are aware that the housing levy sort of has been suspended and put into limbo because A lot of people were opposed to it. However, what your question is really, what effect are we going to see? I mean, the first time we heard about the affordable housing program was in December 2017. We are now in August 2019. How many projects do we know that are affordable housing that have started? Is one project in Park Road,
yeah,
which has been done by the government. I haven't heard about any other project. So maybe you should ask me that question in 2022, so that we can be able to understand what has been done and how does it affect the housing market.
Yeah.
My view is that the problem that we face in this country is not only about affordable housing, it's the provision of decent and dignified housing. I think that's what we need to do. We need to address the issues of whether there's proper infrastructure. When you look at some of these places, do people have clean and safe drinking water? Do we have proper waste management? Do we have proper mass transportation? Are we building using sustainability? I mean, if we go and build affordable housing in Mlolongo or Mavoko, and the person is working in Nairobi, and it costs you 200 shillings a day just to commute, then it doesn't make sense. Because then you don't want to be there because your transport costs are just going to be high. So the enabling environment and the macro is what needs to be addressed. We need to address infrastructure. We need to address, and infrastructure is everything, like roads, transportation, sewer, water, everything. That's what needs to be addressed. And that's what government should be doing. That's what they should be focusing on, not trying to build houses.
They should leave that to private sector.
Even if they build the houses, they will build it inefficiently. It will be expensive. They won't tell us the actual cost of that. They have not factored the cost of the land because it is their land. And then we will not eventually know. So maybe the way I see it is that the government will end up subsidizing what they're calling affordable housing. There's nothing wrong in government investing in social housing.
Yeah.
The social housing is what is important. But again, I still insist that the whole around the environment, the infrastructure is what is meant to be done. So how the housing fund is going to work is still not sure.
Yeah.
We are 2 years down the line. What is the affordable housing program? Yes, I have been very much involved in it through my position as a director of Kenya Property Developers Association and through my chairmanship at the Land and Planning Sector Board at KEPSA. But we're still waiting to see how this whole program will be rolled out.
Yeah.
And maybe because I know too much, I'm a bit of a skeptic.
but on that note, before I let you go, I just there's always the mention of the housing deficit in Kenya, and many have thrown this number into question. When you talk about we have about 100,000 deficit per annum units, do you feel that this is a number which we can bank on, that is actually authentic, or this is just a figure picked from somewhere?
Well, you see, these are figures that they say that have been done by research, have been done by the World Bank, have been done by the Ministry of Housing. I think what we'll be very keen to look at will be the figures from the population and housing census this year.
On Saturday.
On Saturday.
Yeah.
So after Saturday, or rather a few months later, we should be able to have a better picture of what is this deficit in terms of housing. As you go around, I think everyone should be able to ask, how many homeless people do we see who don't have a shelter? They could have a shelter, but it's not decent.
It's not decent.
It's not dignified. But how many people are sleeping without no roof over their heads? So we need to look at, I think there is still a need for more research, and sometimes some of the figures that are I'm not too sure about the accuracy on those figures.
Yeah.